friends, welcome back to Recovery with Alexi. I'm Alexi, I use any pronouns, and this is a series about my experience in recovery. For those of you who are new here, we start off with a check-in, just letting you know how I'm doing, maybe helping you think about how you're doing, and then I deep dive into a recovery topic or mental health topic. So today, I know I'm getting this video out a little bit later than I wanted to. Yesterday was just not it for me. Wound up being a nice New Year's Eve later on, but just during the day was not for me. It was a pretty disappointing day. But that's okay. Let's get into check-in. So 2 positives. I had a pretty good holiday and I had a pretty good New Year's Eve once that part of my day got started. And my other positive is my books came. So I've got, these 2 are both by Melody Beattie. The Language of Letting Go and Journey to the Heart. And I bought both of these at thrift books. I left links in the last video to these. So if you wanted to pick them up, you can go find them at that link. Okay, and these are really good books. They've been super helpful for me so far, and I really enjoy reading them. So that's about my positives. And as far as urges and cravings, I really haven't had any urges or cravings for weed, which is my drug of choice, so that's been pretty good. However, I have been dealing with some issues around drinking alcohol, which is something I do still allow myself to do, which is the reason I don't say that I am fully sober, because I'm not. That is one of my goals this year, is to become fully sober and stop drinking alcohol, but I'm just not there yet, as evidenced by how much I had last night, which I think is pretty relatively normal for people who aren't in recovery, but for somebody like me who is in recovery for a different substance, I should really be moderating how much alcohol I'm using, if not eliminating it completely. And so, like I say, that's one of my goals for this year, and we will progress towards that as we go. So that's about my check-in, and as promised, today we are getting into the topic of forgiveness. I am once again using therapistaid.com, which is a great resource I recommend to everybody. And this is one of their sheets basically explaining what forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't, because I think when it comes to forgiveness, this is something that I have a lot of sort of trepidation around myself, because I fall into some of these misconceptions about what forgiveness is. I tend to think of forgiveness as being condoning of what's happened or excusing it. I tend to think of forgiveness as letting people off the hook, but that's not what forgiveness actually is. So let's go through this. I'm going to start with the green side. Forgiveness is letting go of resentment, anger, and hostility towards someone who treated you unfairly, even though you are justified in having these feelings. It is important to make sure we understand that, like, when people treat us the wrong way, we're justified in being angry at them. We're justified in resenting them for that. But those feelings are not going to help us. They're not going to, especially if the situation is over and you no longer have contact with that person, right? Holding on to that is just going to make yourself upset. It's not going to help keep you safe, which is what these feelings originate from, right? We get angry, we get resentful, we get hostile because we feel like we are unsafe and we want to keep ourselves safe. But if you're out of the situation and you're not around this person anymore, you are safe from them, right? If this person has no ability to affect your life anymore, you are safe from them. So it is safe to let go of these feelings. At least that's my situation. So I know that's not going to be the situation everybody's in, but that's my situation. Forgiveness is recognizing the wrongdoer is human and treating them decently despite what they did. This one is hard for me. I can recognize that the people who hurt me are human all day long. I understand that there is an evil in humanity because I think what was done to me was evil. But treating them decently is difficult. I think it makes more sense to say treating them with basic human respect because they are still a person. I would say things like they still deserve, food, water, shelter, the things I believe that every human deserves. But they don't necessarily deserve me being nice to their faces. They don't necessarily deserve me being nice behind their back. They don't necessarily deserve my time and attention. But they do deserve, I do believe they deserve me treating them decently in the sense that how I believe any human being should be treated, regardless of what they've done. Forgiveness is a chance to amend a relationship that was damaged if you choose to do so. That's not the case for my situation, but it might be the case for you. Forgiveness is a mental shift or a change of heart that develops over time. I think time is really important because you need to really be in healing from what was done to you in order to forgive somebody. It's hard, if not impossible, to forgive someone who is still hurting you. I don't think that's necessarily, I don't know. If you can do it, more power to you, but I don't think that's necessarily the greatest concept. Because then, are you going to keep forgiving them even though they keep hurting you? Are you going to give them the space and ability to keep hurting you? Forgiveness is a process that can start at any time. You can even forgive a person who is no longer in your life. Personally, especially in my particular situation, I feel like that is the best time to forgive someone. Because they're no longer in my life. They can't affect me anymore. They can't hurt me anymore. I can work on letting go of my feelings towards them in a safe way. Forgiveness is an opportunity to heal. Forgiveness can reduce symptoms of trauma, anger, anxiety, and depression. Additionally, it can increase hope and self-esteem. Forgiveness is a personal decision that only you can make for yourself. No one can make you forgive another person. I think that's really important. It's a choice. It's a choice that no one can really force you to make. They can force you to pretend, I guess, in the sense that, if you're being threatened with more harm, you might say that you forgive someone or something like that. But no one can force you to actually, in your heart, forgive someone. You know what I mean? So and they shouldn't, obviously. No one is entitled to your forgiveness if they've harmed you. It can be a good thing for you to forgive. It can be part of your healing journey and your recovery journey. And forgiving yourself can be an important part of your recovery journey. But no one can force you. And I think that's really important. It's something that should be empowering to you, not something that should be forced upon you by another person. So forgiveness is not condoning, approving of, or excusing what happened. Like I said, this is the one I struggle with a lot. I feel like if I forgive somebody, it means that, what they did to me wasn't that bad, or, I've made peace with it in some way, which I haven't. So I think this is why forgiveness can be hard for me, is because I haven't really internalized this definition where forgiveness is not condoning, approving of, or excusing what happened. I don't feel like when I try to forgive, that doesn't always feel true to me. But that's the definition. So I need to think on it more and figure out a way to forgive that's not going to put me in that state of mind, that doesn't give me those feelings, And maybe I'm just not ready to forgive yet, and that's okay. Forgiveness is not forgetting how you were wrong or pretending like nothing happened. And again, that's something that I personally struggle with. Maybe you do too. Forgiveness is not an agreement to continue a relationship as it was. After forgiving someone, you can choose to resume, modify, or end the relationship. So you don't have to... Forgiveness doesn't mean you have to do what the other person wants. You don't have to give in to their demands, you know? Again, no one can make you forgive another person. You don't do this because of what someone else wants of you. You do this for yourself. Forgiveness is not simply saying, I forgive you without meaning it. In fact, you can forgive without ever saying so. So again, that comes back to like, yes, you could just say you forgive someone and not mean it, but that's not true forgiveness, you know? True forgiveness can only come from actually meaning it in your heart. Forgiveness is not something you do for the other person. Forgiveness is for you. So that's important too. It's not something you do to let the other person off the hook or make them feel better. It's something you have to do for yourself. Forgiveness is not getting even or getting revenge. Getting even might feel good in the moment, but unlike forgiveness, it does not resolve anger and resentment. I don't really have anything to say about that one. I don't know what that would even look like for me. So, forgiveness is not something that can be forced. Just because you want to forgive doesn't mean that forgiveness has been achieved. I think that's an important piece too, because like I want to be able to forgive what happened to me, but I don't think I'm there. I don't think I have that ability right now. I think I'm still working on that. And that's something I can explore this new year, and work on as part of my healing journey, as part of my recovery journey. And yeah, I think that's important. One thing that came up for me when we did this in my IOP was that I had a lot of struggle with forgiving myself for things that I've done in my past, even if everyone else has moved on and forgiven me. So I am still friends with one of my exes, and we broke up because I ran off with another guy. I can make excuses for that. I think it was very much influenced by, at the time, undiagnosed BPD and depression and just needing to get away from the life I was living and things like that. But obviously that's not a good thing for me to have done. That's not a kind thing for me to have done. It really hurt him, and somehow he has long since forgiven me for this. It did happen about 16 years ago. So it makes sense that he's forgiven me for this, but it took me a long time to actually forgive myself. And one of the things that our clinician said that really helped me was write a letter to yourself exploring that and forgiving yourself. And I did that, and it really helped a lot. It helped me to process a lot of my feelings around it and why I couldn't forgive myself, and realize that the harm I did has already been healed. So I needed to understand that the harm I did to myself has also already been healed. So writing a letter to yourself, especially if it's something that you're having a hard time forgiving in yourself, writing a letter to yourself can be a really good idea. Writing a letter that you don't send, specifically, writing a letter to the person you're trying to forgive about what they've done to you and why you want to forgive them, and things like that is a really good tactic. So you can write it in your journal. You know, I'm a big journaling proponent. You can write it just on a scrap piece of paper. You can write it on your computer. You can email it to yourself if you need to feel like you sent it somewhere. You can burn it if you write it on paper or print it out. Anything like that is a really good tactic. So I do have another worksheet from Therapist Aid. This is the actual worksheet we went over when we were doing this activity, because my therapy programs loved Therapist Aid, which is how I found out about it. So, and I do too. So this is going to go over some of the same things as on the previous sheet, but they're going to word it a little bit differently, and it's going to get a little in depth. So, forgiveness is a process where someone who has been wronged chooses to let go of their resentment and treat the wrongdoer with compassion. I think this is really good wording, because compassion is something that anyone can work on and cultivate towards, our fellow human beings. A lot of places will say empathy instead, but I know there are a lot of people who struggle with empathy. It's not something that comes naturally to everyone, especially people with certain personality disorders, certain neurodivergencies. This is not necessarily the greatest wording of empathy, but I think compassion is something that everyone can work on and get better at, and I think that it is a really good wording here. And compassion is something that we all wish that we were treated with, right? So we can understand that we need to treat others with compassion. It's the golden rule, right? Treat others how you want them to treat you. So I think this is a good definition. Deepening understanding of forgiveness. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting or condoning the wrongdoing, granting legal mercy, or reconciling a relationship. I think this is interesting for them to add, granting legal mercy. You can forgive someone and still take legal action against them for something that they've done to you if it was legally wrong. In fact, a lot of the times, I'm a big Judge Judy person. That's my hobbies are knitting and watching Judge Judy. I know it's not the greatest, and it's, can be a level of propaganda in there and everything like this, but it's an entertaining show, and it's supposed to be. So one thing that you do see on Judge Judy is a lot of family disputes, and then at the end, they'll interview each party and see, how do you think the case went, blah, blah, blah. And one of the questions they often ask is, do you forgive the other person? And sometimes, especially when it's a family member, they'll be like, yes, I do actually. I forgive this other person, especially if the case went their way. They'll forgive the other person and be like, I just want, things to go back to the way they were, and blah, blah, blah. But sometimes they'll be like, no, I don't forgive them, because what they did sucked. And that's okay. I mean, like we said in the previous slide, forgiveness is a personal choice that is yours to make. No one can force you into it. If you don't forgive someone, that's totally fine. That's on you. That's your choice. That's your way of going through life. That's totally okay. You can forgive a person while in no way believing that their actions were acceptable or justified. On the other hand, simply saying the words, I forgive you, or accepting an apology is not forgiveness. In fact, forgiveness can occur without ever speaking to the wrongdoer. Forgiveness is an emotional change that occurs within the person who has been wronged. So again, they give us a little what it is and what it isn't. Forgiveness is the decision to overcome pain that was inflicted by another person. Forgiveness is letting go of anger, resentment, shame, and other emotions associated with an injustice, even though they are reasonable feelings. Forgiveness is treating the offender with compassion, even though they are not entitled to it. I feel like a lot of this kind of comes around as being forgiveness is being the bigger person and letting things go, really. And that's a fine way to live your life. That's a very decent way to live your life. Forgiveness isn't reconciliation, repairing, or returning to a relationship. It can be. You can choose reconciliation as part of forgiveness, but it doesn't have to be. Forgiveness isn't forgetting the injustice. Forgiveness isn't condoning or excusing the offender's behavior. It isn't granting legal mercy to the offender. It isn't, quote, letting go, but wishing for revenge. So I think that's important too. The 4 phases of forgiveness. The uncovering phase. During the first phase of forgiveness, you will improve your understanding of the injustice and how it has impacted your life. The decision phase. During the second phase, you will gain a deeper understanding of what forgiveness is and make the decision to choose or reject forgiveness as an option. You might stop there. You might say, no, I don't want to forgive, and just stop there. The work phase. During the third phase, you will start to understand the offender in a new way, which will allow positive feelings toward the offender and yourself. The deepening phase. During the final phase of forgiveness, you will further decrease the negative emotions associated with the injustice. You may find meaning in the experiences and recognize ways in which you have grown as a result. This is a good template for what I was saying before about writing a letter or journaling about this, of going through these 4 phases and writing down your interpretation of events, of how people are, of, what happened, and how you feel about it, and whether or not you choose to forgive, and, how you choose to understand the offender, and everything like this. And this is actually a worksheet where it has spaces for you to write in. So it goes through all 4 of the phases. So first you describe the injustice, what happened, why was this treatment unfair, how have the injustices affected you, circle any of the examples that apply and describe them in the box below. Feel free to add something that isn't listed. So things like painful emotions, changed behavior, practical costs, changed worldview, cognitive rehearsal, physical harm. I will say, and again, this comes from my love of Judge Judy, several of these injuries are legally actionable. Physical harm, practical costs, and in some cases, painful emotions, changed behavior, and changed worldview are legally actionable. You can take someone to court for these things. I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. You need to check in with the laws and statutes of your particular local, state, country, wherever you are at. But in many cases, especially in the United States, if someone harms you in these ways, you can take them at least to civil court for monetary reimbursement, if not to criminal court for especially things like physical harm. Those are crimes. You can take legal action against people for these things. So just wanted to throw that out there since we were talking about legal action earlier in these worksheets. And taking legal action against someone may prompt you to forgive them especially if you gain what you're looking for from the court judgment. You might say, okay, that's enough. That's the punishment that I feel is adequate for them, and now I can forgive them. So if that's something you want to explore, talk to a lawyer. Always talk to a lawyer. But if that's something you want to explore, a lot of these injury types can be taken to court. So, and that can help you in your process of forgiveness. But again, just describing all the ways that the injustices have affected you. Then we move on to the decision phase. Without looking at a definition, how would you describe forgiveness? And now we've gone over forgiveness a lot, so you'd be able to do that. Then I have a little pros and cons. What are the pros and cons of deciding to forgive the person? Whether or not you've made the decision to forgive, describe how things might be different if you decide to do so, and be specific as possible. Then we move on to the work phase. You will start to understand the offender. You will not start to offend. You will start to understand the offender in a new way, which will allow positive feelings toward the offender and yourself. Respond to one of the following prompts. What was life like for the offender as they grew up? May this have impacted their behavior? Or what was life like for the offender at the time of the offense? This is a really especially good one if you're having trouble forgiving yourself for someone, because this talks about the context of the actions, which we understand that the actions themselves can be wrong, but they can also have a context to them that led up to that action happening. Do you know what I mean? Such as, let's say hypothetically, I stole money from my mom to pay for drugs, right? Obviously stealing is wrong. Obviously stealing from my mom is wrong. This is a total hypothetical because I do not live anywhere near my mom in order to be able to steal from her, but regardless, let's say stealing is wrong. Stealing from your mom is wrong. Stealing from your mom to pay for drugs is wrong. We know these things. This is a harm that you can do to someone else. But when we look at the context, What was life like for the offender at the time of the offense? I was going through addiction, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't have wanted drugs in order to steal from my mom to pay for them. So when you look at it like that, you need to, well, you don't need to, but you can give yourself grace in that respect. Say, I was dealing with addiction. I was not in a clear state of mind to be able to understand my actions as being right or wrong. I was sick. I was mentally ill, basically. And in my case of when we did this worksheet, what I mentioned earlier was what I did for this worksheet was in my specific situation when I left my boyfriend for another person. Specifically, I moved several states to live with this person. I was severely depressed. I was dealing with untreated BPD. I was in a living environment that I believed at the time to be haunted. I was not sleeping well. I was not eating well. I was living with someone who was anorexic, both in the actual mental illness way, and also we were dealing with food insecurity because we didn't have very much money. So it was kind of both things feeding into each other, and then ironically not feeding us. It was not a time where I was capable of making clear-headed decisions. It was not a time where I was capable of thinking about my actions and saying, is this the right thing to do? I didn't have the ability to process those things in my mind in that way. And that's not an excuse. That doesn't take away the harm that I did. But it's the context of why those actions happened, right? It's harder for me personally, it might not be as hard for you. It's harder for me personally to look at another person's actions and give them this treatment. So that's why I started with myself and not being able to forgive myself for things. Because to be honest, if I tried to do this exercise with my abusers, I don't think I could. I don't think I have the capacity to extend them this form of compassion yet. I may never. And I think that's okay. There's a reason this is called the work phase of forgiveness. It's not meant to be easy. It's meant to test you. And I think that's one of the reasons why I don't have the ability to forgive these people yet. And I may never do. I'm at peace with that. I'm okay with that. So let's move on. List the feelings you currently have toward the offender. Right? Did you list any positive feelings toward the offender? If so, describe them. If not, describe how your negative feelings have changed over time. Have they lessened? If you pick something that happened to you a very long time ago, you may genuinely feel like, yes, my negative feelings have lessened because I'm farther away from this experience. I've had positive experiences since then. I know myself better. I'm better able to take care of myself and my own feelings. Things like that are possible for you. But it's also possible that your negative feelings have not lessened at all, even if it's something that happened a long time ago. And that's also okay. This is not a value judgment exercise. This is literally just the questions as they are asked. If your negative feelings have not lessened over time, that's okay. That's just your experience, you know? Getting it all out is only going to help you. Even if you're not ready or able to forgive, understanding how you're feeling is only going to help you. And then we move on to the deepening phase. During the deepening phase, you will further decrease the negative emotions associated with the injustice. So, how have you benefited by forgiving the offender? I would also say, if you haven't yet, how might you benefit from forgiving the offender? Consider how forgiveness has affected your emotional health, behavioral changes that resulted from the injustice, and time and energy spent thinking about the offender. That's another really good point, though. Time and energy spent thinking about the offender. when you forgive someone, it is a letting go. And in that sense, you might not spend as much time thinking about what happened to you. You might say, I've put this behind me, you know? Or you might say, I can't put this behind me. And that's also totally okay. You know, especially in cases where we've been traumatized by these things. We're not obligated to forgive. We're not obligated to put this behind us. If this affects us every day, it affects us every day. That's just part of our journey. Describe how you have grown because of the injustice you endured and your efforts to forgive. How has your worldview changed? Are you stronger than you were before deciding to forgive? So this page in particular is supposed to come after you've already forgiven the person. But I think you can use them as hypotheticals too. Like, a lot of people will say that, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And a lot of traumatized people will say, well, did it though? Did it make me stronger? And I think that's kind of the sense that they're going for here with this question. How have you grown because of the injustice? Have you grown because of the injustice? Have you grown because of your response to the injustice? Have you maybe become a more compassionate person because now you understand what it's like to be harmed in that way? Have you maybe given back to the community from that position? So, for example, there are a lot of abuse survivors who go into helping other abuse survivors. There are a lot of, for instance, this isn't necessarily something that would need forgiveness per se, but my mom is a disabled veteran. And she spends most of her time these days helping other disabled veterans fill out paperwork and get their benefits. And so I think if that wasn't her experience, which is in a way an injustice, I would say, not necessarily the result of, well, no, she has PTSD, so yeah, I guess that is the result of some people's faults. I always forget that, like, disabilities can be caused by other people. But some can. So if she hadn't had those experiences, as awful as they were, she might not be in a good position to help other people now. And that's kind of the thing that they really want you to think about here. They're not trying to say, like, that your trauma made you stronger, or that, like, you're a better person because you were hurt, or anything like that. They want to know about, what have you done in your life that has changed in maybe a positive way because of what you experienced. Are you helping other people now? Are you maybe taking care of animals? Maybe you got close to animals because you were more frightened of people, but now you're great with animals and you went into, you know, a position where you care for animals now. And that's a great life, you know? Maybe my brain is failing me and I can't think of any more hypotheticals or examples, but I think you get the picture. This isn't about excusing what you went through or saying it's fine because I'm a better person now. This is just saying, what are the factual ways in which you have changed and grown because of what happened to you? Because we're always changing and growing because of everything that happens to us, good, bad, or indifferent, right? So I think these are some really important and powerful resources that I personally have a hard time with. I struggle with this. I'm not, you know, I've been honest this whole time. I'm not lying to you. I struggle really hard with the idea of forgiving some of the people who have hurt me in my life. And I may never be able to. And that's something that is just going to come with time and with doing the work. And if it doesn't come, it doesn't come. I've accepted that too. Yeah. So that's about forgiveness. And I hope that on your journey, if you choose to forgive, if you choose not to forgive, I hope these resources have been helpful for understanding how these things can affect you, and understanding your experiences and your own reactions to them. So this was another long one. That's all I have for you today. Happy New Year. Hope to see you next week. And, you know, stay golden. Bye.